friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to Lumos, Illuminating Harry Potter. We're going to talk about detective fiction first of all, how it plays out in Harry Potter, and we are going to be comparing the types of detective work in two detective short stories, The Purloined Letter by Edgar Allan Poe and A Scandal in Bohemia by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This episode will contain spoilers for all three texts. What is detective fiction? Detective fiction is a genre of writing where a detective works to solve a crime, and the audience is challenged to solve the crime by clues provided before the detective reveals the answer at the end of the novel. English language detective fiction is actually believed to, or at least commonly cited, to begin with Edgar Allan Poe's 1841 publication of The Murders in the Rue Morgue. This is frequently cited as featuring the first fictional detective, C. Auguste Dupin. He was a detective before the word detective was even invented. And it is Poe who devised the mystery plot formula that continues to this day with some variation, but like the essential elements are still there from Poe's first Dupin stories. And Dupin is actually the prototype for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot. Both are famous detectives in the mystery detective fiction genre. While Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone isn't a straight detective fiction, it draws on many of these detective fiction elements. Let's talk about some of those. Harry, Ron, and Hermione are investigating mysteries throughout the novel. The reader is incorporated as a detective in the novel. There's a lot of deductive logic in Harry Potter, which is a very Sherlock Holmes approach. And there are red herrings, of course. So let's talk about The Purloined Letter by Edgar Allan Poe. So in The Purloined Letter, we see two detectives, two different approaches to solving a crime. We have the prefect of police who has been hired by the Queen to retrieve her letter. He chooses a very forensic approach. His approach is all based on logic and science and math and instruments and data. And his search of the thief's apartment is very physical and it's very empirical. He puts a lot of emphasis on his police gadgets. Throughout this piece, we hear about the scientific dissection of furniture. Quote, "Why, the fact is we took our time and we searched everywhere. I have had long experience in these affairs. I took the entire building room by room, devoting the nights of a whole week to each. We examined first the furniture of each apartment. We opened every possible drawer, and I presume that you know that to a properly trained police agent, such a thing as a secret drawer is impossible. Any man is a dolt who permits a secret drawer to escape him in a search of this kind. The thing is so plain. There is a certain amount of bulk, of space, to be accounted for in every cabinet. Then we have accurate rules. The 50th part of a line could not escape us. After the cabinets, we took the chairs. The cushions we probed with fine, long needles you have seen me employ. From the tables, we removed the tops." And then later we have scientific observation. Quote, "Certainly not. We did better. We examined the rungs of every chair in the hotel, and, indeed, the joinings of every description of furniture, by the aid of a most powerful microscope. Had there been any traces of recent disturbance, we should not have failed to detect it instantly. A single grain of gimlet dust, for example, would have been as obvious as an apple. Any disorder in the gluing, any unusual gaping in the joints, would have sufficed to ensure detection." End quote. So the prefect of police approaches this crime using all of the modern technology in his grasp, I suppose. He is very much under the impression that he's investigating the place. Because he's investigating a physical space, the more that he can see with his eyes, the better. And it's interesting that we know from the outset that the prefect of police has failed. This very mathematical, logical, forensic, technological approach to searching the apartment has failed. He has spent months searching this apartment and cannot find this letter in any crook or crevice. So the prefect of police brings in Dupin as a consultant. And it is very clear that Dupin is going to take a different approach. At the beginning of the story, the second paragraph, we see that Dupin arose for the purpose of lighting a lamp. Quote, "If it is any point requiring reflection, observed Dupin, as he forbore to enkindle the wick, we shall examine it to better purpose in the dark. He is going to eliminate the sense of sight and listen to what the prefect of police has to say, because all of the prefect of police's attempts at seeing, of like visually observing the space, have failed. He is relying on inward reflection that he is better able to do in the dark by removing all other stimuli. He's just left alone with his mind while the prefect of police talks. We see that Dupin is investigating a person, not a place. And so he thinks through what he knows of the thief as a person. He's sort of building this psychological profile. So he knows that the thief, the minister, is both a mathematician and a poet. So the inspector says, but then he's a poet, which I take to be only one remove from a fool, because he's not a logical thinker, right? A poet is an emotional thinker, an artist versus a scientist. True, said Dupin, after a long and thoughtful whiff of his whatever he's smoking. Although I've been guilty of a certain doggerel myself, so Dupin has also dabbled in poetry. He is also able to put himself in the mind of a poet, of an artist. What Dupin has noted and is reflecting on is the character of the minister. The minister is a poet, and poets think creatively. Dupin comes up with the theory that the minister has hid the letter in plain sight, because this would be the unconventional thing to do with something you're trying to hide. Right at the beginning of the piece, the prefect of police says, the fact is, we have all been a good deal puzzled because the affair is so simple, and yet it baffles us altogether. And Dupin says, perhaps it is the very simplicity of the thing which puts you at fault. Perhaps the mystery is a little too plain, a little too self-evident. So his theory is that it's right in front of their faces. That would be the creative, the unconventional thing to do with a document that you're trying to hide. And so we see here that there is an opposition between science, logic, reasoning, and intuition, creative thinking, emotion. So it's like the science versus social science, right? The science versus art that is coming into play here. Dupin's theory is correct. He knows the person, he knows the character of the minister, the thief. Dupin goes into the minister's place, he's wearing sunglasses so that you can't see his eyes, and he's sort of glancing around the room. He's checking out the letter writing desk of the minister. At length my eyes, in going the circuit of the room, fell upon a trumpery filigree card rack of pasteboard that hung dangling by a dirty blue ribbon from a little brass knob just beneath the middle of the mantelpiece. In this rack, which had 3 or 4 compartments, were 5 or 6 visiting cards and a solitary letter. This last was much soiled and crumpled. It was torn nearly in two across the middle, as if by design in the first instance to tear it entirely up as worthless. No sooner had I glanced at the letter than I concluded it to be that of which I was in search. It was radically different from the one of which the prefect had read us so minute a description. The thief, the minister, has doctored the letter to make it appear worthless and unimportant. He puts it in full view of every visitor. Like, everyone searching the apartment, obviously you're not gonna hide a letter in your letterbox. It's too obvious, it's too in the open, it's too unsafe. But nobody's gonna look there because it is so obvious. That logic, that emotional, creative thinking is how Dupin solves the case over the prefect of police. So the other text that I included in this is almost a rewrite. It feels like a rewrite to me. So if the Purloined letter came out in 1844, 1845. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle published A Scandal in Bohemia in 1891. It draws on many of the same elements, and it's why I put the two texts together. Once again, we have a stolen object. It's very important that this object be retrieved, and Sherlock Holmes is put on the case. And so I actually did a live annotation of this piece where I showed my process, what I'm looking for, how I pulled apart this text. So you can see me work through that process in the video I will link in the cards. But now I'm gonna actually demonstrate how I'm putting these annotations into practice. Holmes is investigating a woman who is holding this picture hostage and for ransom over the King of Bohemia, who's going to be married, and this scandalous photo photo cannot get out. If Dupin is all about emotion and creative thinking, Holmes is more in line with the prefect of police. He is described as, quote, cold, precise, but admirably balanced of mind. And he has this perfect reasoning and observing machine. And he never spoke of softer passions save with a jibe and a sneer. So he doesn't value emotion. He doesn't value art or creative thinking. He is very much in favor of the cold, mechanical, mathematical, forensic, scientific, data collection approach to solving a crime. He's very much about making precise observations and deducing a conclusion. When they talk about this visitor who's coming to call, they're like, it's a mystery. What do you imagine it means? And Holmes goes, quote, I have no data yet. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. Dupin's approach was to throw away all the data and to theorize first. Dupin theorizes that if this whole place has been searched, the logical thing is the most illogical thing, the simplest thing. And so he comes up with this theory that the letter must be left somewhere in the open, somewhere so obvious that no one would look for it. And so that's his theory, and he goes into the office of the minister to collect his data after he has his theory. In contrast to Dupin, Holmes' approach in his case is to collect data and reason logically from the data that he's collected. But in his strict adherence to this data, he fails to take into consideration the human, the emotional, the artistic, and that's why he fails to solve this case. Dupin has an understanding of the thief. He knows the thief is an artist. Holmes doesn't understand Irene Adler, so he keeps an index of people, and what he knows about Irene Adler is that she was, quote, born in New Jersey in the year 1858, a contralto, La Scala, prima donna Imperial Opera of Warsaw, retired from the operatic stage, living in London. His cue card about her is that she is a stage performer. She is an artist, just like the minister, and he doesn't value that information. He takes that data about her being an emotional, creative thinker, a performer, somebody familiar with costumes and disguises, and he just dismisses it. He doesn't even take that into consideration in his plan to get this incriminating photo from her. If he had, he might have realized that in being an opera singer, in being a stage performer, she is no stranger to wearing costumes. In fact, she regularly walks the street as a man because of the freedoms that it allows her. She also sees people in costumes, so she's more willing to see past what is performative behavior and see the human, the actor underneath it, right? Watson is very impressed by Holmes' disguise as a, horsey man. Irene Adler is not impressed by his performance of clergyman. She can see through it. She clues into the fact that he has come into her space investigating her in costume, but when she follows him home to confirm his identity, that she has indeed been vulnerable and revealed the location of the photo to a detective, Detective Sherlock Holmes, he doesn't see her in costume. He doesn't recognize her. And so Irene's strategy to dupe Holmes is based largely on what she has been told about him, so she knows her adversary. Holmes doesn't really know his adversary. He makes huge assumptions about her based on gender. He's going off stereotypical account of how he believes women should behave, right? If a room is on fire, a mother will rush to her child. An unmarried woman with no children will rush to her jewels because, women love their children if they have them, and they love their jewelry if they don't have children. And that's a huge gendered stereotype, and that is his fallacy. That is his downfall. He assumes that she is all fluff and obsessed with her valuables. Like, he doesn't look at her as an individual, as an actress, as a person with skills of deception of her own. Ultimately, where Holmes goes wrong is that he wasn't expecting a woman to think. He psychologically manipulates her, and he does that successfully, right? Like, he logics that if the house is on fire, if she believes that her house is threatened and this most precious object of the blackmail photo is threatened, that she will rush to it in that moment of distress. And so he witnesses her do that, and he's like, aha, she's given herself up, I can come back and take this thing now. But he doesn't acknowledge that she is a thinker, that she can think, and that she would realize that, oh, I exposed this very precious object to another human being. Maybe I shouldn't hide it here anymore. He assumes that women are, and specifically this woman who is an actress, a performer, an artist, is just an emotional, non-rational being. And he is foiled because she has the potential to both be emotional and rational. Going to Harry Potter, Harry, Ron, and Hermione fail in similar ways to Holmes. They do the collecting data part right, but they rely too much on stereotype to succeed, to successfully predict who is trying to steal the stone. And it's that stereotypical thinking that gets them into trouble, right? Snape is dirty and greasy, and he doesn't like Harry. He's always giving Harry mean looks and treating them poorly. He looks like the villain. He acts like a villain. Therefore, he must be the villain. Whereas Quirrell is like stuttering and quiet and timid and weakly, therefore he cannot be the villain. Harry observes Snape and Quirrell in a lot of these situations, and he reads these situations with Snape as the villain because he's bought into his own stereotyping about what a villain looks like. So in all three of these stories, the characters see what they're expecting to see. The prefect of police doesn't expect the letter to be in the open, so he doesn't see it. Sherlock Holmes believes he's superior to everybody else, and so he doesn't expect Irene to turn around and investigate him. And our golden trio in Harry Potter sees Professor Snape being ugly and mean and sketchy, and so they assume he's working for Voldemort. And so we have a couple of scenes where, on the first reading, because we're aligned with Harry as our narrator, we also see Snape as the villain. When Harry follows Snape and Quirrell into the forest, Harry thinks that Snape is being mean to Quirrell, tormenting him based on his own bias about Snape. When Hermione sees Snape muttering in the stands during the Quidditch match, she assumes that he is jinxing the broom, not offering a counter jinx to protect Harry, because she has also bought into this bias that Snape is evil. And like, it's not just Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Hagrid sees this shadowy, hooded, sketchy guy in a bar, and he sees what he wants to see. This guy has a dragon's egg. Obviously, he wants to get rid of it. It's not an evil plot to manipulate information out of him. It is a conversation between two magical creature enthusiasts. Even right at the beginning of the book, Vernon Dursley sees what he wants to see. He sees people in strange clothes, owls everywhere, and he assumes that there's some sort of weird convention going on, even though he knows that there is this magical other world. He just chooses so strongly to ignore it. He sees what he wants to see. So unlike Holmes and our Harry Potter cast of characters, Dupin really thinks about his own biases. He reflects when he turns off that light about what he knows about the minister, how the minister thinks, how the minister acts, his own preconceived ideas about this human. And in doing so, he is the most successful of our detectives. It is an intuitive approach versus the very logical, sciencey Holmes approach. So that is how I see the history of detective fiction functioning in the Harry Potter series. Before we wrap it up, I want to point out how this text allows us as readers to participate. Many of the clues throughout this text, especially these new editions, these clues are italicized or highlighted in some way. So, for example, on page 109 of these new editions of the text, we see that the chocolate frog card is actually separated from the text. It's been put into a rectangle shape. We have Albus Dumbledore, currently headmaster of Hogwarts, considered by many the greatest wizard of modern times. Professor Dumbledore is particularly famous for his defeat of the dark wizard Grindelwald in 1945, for the discovery of the 12 uses of dragon's blood, and his work on alchemy with his partner, Nicholas Flamel. We have a clue. It's a piece of evidence for us as readers. It's been bolded out in the text as this thing to pay attention to. So if we are playing along with this mystery, once we realize, like, oh, there was a break-in at Gringotts, the stone has been stolen, Hagrid said it's the safest place in the world, like, what's going on here? We have the mystery of Fluffy with the trap door, right? Hermione is that Holmes-like detective. She is good at empirical thinking and observation. So when everybody else is freaking out about Fluffy just being a giant dangerous beast, she collects the data of seeing that it's over a trap door and makes the logical deduction that it must be guarding something. If we are collecting these clues along with Hermione, we have that to add to our case file, so to speak. So as we collect these clues, we can play along, and if we're paying attention, we might remember the name Nicholas Flamel when Hagrid accidentally drops it to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. That whatever is going on in the school, whatever Fluffy is guarding, is between Professor Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel. If we've been paying close attention, we have that clue. We might flip back in the text and go, no wait, just like Harry, I've read that name too. Where did I read it? Much of the whodunit throughout this piece is fair, except for the potions riddle. And so I want to work this out with us together. So again, we have this clue blocked out. It's part of the evidence, part of a riddle that we're going to solve as detective readers alongside Hermione and Harry. Danger lies before you while safety lies behind. Two of us will help you, whichever you would find. So there are 7 bottles. So one among us 7 will let you move ahead. Another will transport the drinker back instead. 2 among our number hold only nettle wine. 3 of us are killers, waiting hidden in line. Choose unless you wish to stay here forevermore. To help you in your choice, we give you these clues 4. First, however slyly the poison tries to hide, you will always find some on nettle wine's left side. Second, different are those that stand on either end. But if you would move onwards, neither is your friend. So this is not forward. It's the wordplay there, right? If you would move onwards, so not backwards, neither is your friend. Third, as you clearly see, all are different size. We don't have that clue. Neither dwarf nor giant holds death in their insides. Fourth, the second left and second right are twins once you taste them, though different at first sight. So I am assuming that these are wine, because I'm assuming that this clue is fair, and that if you're tasting them, these are wine. The first clue is however slyly the poison tries to hide, you will always find some on nettle wine's left side. So if this is wine, this is poison. If this is wine, this is poison. Which means that 3 and 4 are the options to choose between. And one of them is poison because there are 3 poisons. This one is not forward, so this one takes us back, right? 3 and 4, one of them is poison, and one of them takes us forward. And the clue for this, third is you can clearly see all are different size. Well, no, because we're not given size descriptions. So this clue we can only work out so far, and that's a dangerous risk. One of them is poison. This is one of the only unfair clues in the text. And there's one more risk there. It assumes that Professor Snape, who has designed this riddle, is honest. Hermione takes this leap of faith in assuming that the bottles are in the correct order to begin with, that the clue is still right, that Professor Snape wouldn't have tried to dupe Dumbledore in putting together this challenge, right? There are so many variables, and Hermione, sort of naively as an 11-year-old, assumes that this clue is fair, which is, you know, fair, because she's 11. So that brings us to the end of today's video. I hope that you enjoyed thinking about Harry Potter as a piece of detective fiction and looking at the ways in which it draws on its literary predecessors in the detective fiction genre, and also thinking about how our young cast functions as detectives, how they base a lot of their detective work on assumptions and stereotypes, and how, just like with Sherlock Holmes, that doesn't work for them. They don't predict that it is Quirrell who is trying to steal the stone because they are so focused on that red herring of Snape. My discussion question for you is, did you play along? Did you solve the riddle as a child reader or as a current reader? Let me know how you read this text if you were a detective reader alongside Harry, Ron, and Hermione. And homework, next week I will be talking about the 2001 film Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. My guinea pig patrons currently have my very first attempt at a video commentary. It's a little bit cheesy.
Do you mind?
He's so cute too. A little less formal, a little more of me having fun. So if you are interested in becoming a guinea pig and having access to that, I will leave a link to the Patreon page on the screen and down below. Take a couple hours to yourself and rewatch the film if you haven't in a while. For homework, have a quiet, fun movie night, maybe invite some friends over and enjoy the film so that we can discuss it next week. Thank you to my patrons who make videos like this free for you to watch. If you want to tip me for the work that I am doing, if you want access to reading materials, in addition to just supporting the channel, supporting this project, the link to the Patreon page is in the description box down below. Thank you, patrons, for your support, and until next time, happy reading.